Thanks, Jenna. I think it's just 7 o'clock right now. Maybe given that we do have 2 committees and 2 commissions, we'll wait another minute or so. People are still queuing in. And Paul, is Peter in the meeting yet or no?
Let me check. I think he was
Rowan
just
and
joined.
Sam and Emma.
Yeah, I think Peter's trying to join. Let me make sure he can.
Sure.
Hello, everybody.
Is that Kevin?
That's
Okay,
me
just
saying
let
hello, yes.
Peter in.
I think Peter's on, right? You on, Peter?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Now, Mike, we have 28 people. I don't know whether you want to start with the introduction or you want to give it a little time.
Yeah, I think.
Please start.
Yeah, just to be respectful of people, I think we will get started, Demetra, because we got a lot to cover. Yep. I think people will join as we start the process off. I just want to say a few comments. We do have tonight a presentation on the ArtBus Zero Emission Bus Feasibility Study. Joined tonight is our consultant with multiple team members. Paul Ellman is the project manager at this point. Paul, if you want to raise your hand, I'm not going to do a full introduction, but you're going to hear multiple speakers from Kimberly Horn, as well as some county staff presenting in the presentation tonight. We did forward the full study and some questions and answers Friday late. Hopefully people have gotten a chance to review those. And with that, what we're planning to do, Demetra, you can set the ground rules or some of the lay of the land, but I'm going to turn it over to Demetra to start the presentation as soon as Rowan gets it queued up. Rowan, you want to host it?
Are you seeing it, Mike? Because I'm seeing it.
Yeah, it's all set. It's
okay.
Presented there.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I see it now. All right, go ahead, Demetra. All to you.
Yeah, very quickly, just because we have so many people, we have 2 committees and 2 commissions here with us tonight. We are recording for the benefit of everyone. We know that there were a number of questions that were provided to us by C2E2. In the interest of just giving everybody kind of a fair rotation here on the Q&A, what we're going to do is ask that everyone hold their questions until the end of the presentation. We're going to try to be brisk but fulsome and allow sufficient time for your questions. And then what we're going to do is really kind of go around. We know that there may be, particularly given the list of questions from C2E2, that it's possible that we may not get through everybody's questions. We do want to say that we are happy to have a follow-up session just in order to address that. But in order to be mindful of people's time, if you could go to the next slide, please. Very quickly, for those of you who are being introduced to the project for the first time, this is a breakdown basically of the tasks and the scope and our timeline, which you understand that at the end, this is where we are now. There is one decision that we staked out in red here that was made earlier this year in order to meet a DRPT application deadline, which was February 1st. Next, please. The intended outcomes are not going to surprise you. First and foremost, to support Arlington CEP and the carbon neutrality goal by 2050. There are a number of assessments. They're both operational, functional, spatial, fiscal, and otherwise technical and environmental. It just goes to show the complexity of this transition away from CNG buses. And then, of course, to present potential paths forward for the deployment of low and zero emissions bus. This is the bookend objective and key outcome of finding that great balance between our sustainability and our environmental goals, as well as the need for multimodal transportation and a level of service. Next, please. This goes a little bit more into the study structure and its content. And again, as I said before on the earlier slide, we start off with a literature review. That literature review goes to transportation districts, both in the region and nationally. And at the end, we did model scenarios for low and no emissions buses. But again, this is a study, and we want to emphasize not a master plan or long-term strategic plan. So it ends with recommendations for the fleet and facilities modifications. Next, please. I'm not going to read the key assumptions and variables, but there are a couple that really deserve a little attention here because they'll be integral to the rest of the PowerPoint. We did plan on recommending, of course, the BEB pilot and an FCEB pilot. We had a pilot, a short-term demonstration, basically, for a couple of weeks in the fall. These pilots are meant to be fulsome, heavily documented, lots of metrics and recording on performance of the technology. The analysis you're going to find, with one exception on one slide, is focusing on tailpipe emissions, not life cycle emissions. These calculations do not account for the variability of charging infrastructure performance, which the lit review tells us, and our neighbor right next door, Alexandria, can be at times due to the weather somewhat mercurial. Again, I want to emphasize this is a living document. It is a feasibility study intended to bring up information, really look at, again, all of those different aspects of moving away from CNG buses and all the different methodologies and all the different technology and other aspects of this change that we have to look at and be aware of. And then, of course, lay out what we think are reasonable pathways to move forward. But again, it is a study that, because the technology is evolving so rapidly and improving so rapidly, because, again, the assumption is we are not basing on hypotheticals. This is a study because it was meant to inform time-sensitive decisions on the technology that we have now. So it is expected, certainly, that we will revisit this study, certainly within the next 3 to 5 years, probably closer to 3 years. And then, of course, there are the unknowns, which are the externalities. That's funding service changes that may impact the fleet size. We may have routes that are off-ramp to us from the DC connector. There's unforeseen capital and operating costs that may arise. Obviously, there's training necessary for any new technology. And, of course, the grid capacity for BEBs. Next, please. Looking again at our tailpipe emissions by vehicle type, these are not going to be surprising to anyone. Arlington County is in an ozone non-attainment zone. I do want to point out that not all the time, but not infrequently, when we go into non-attainment for ozone, Arlington is, unfortunately, so to say, downstream in an airshed that brings emissions from power plants in Ohio and Pennsylvania that are coal powered down to Arlington. Next, please. And this is the only time you're really going to see this embodied emissions. Now, we've been asked a question about the negative emissions. You're not going to be surprised by the diesel and probably not CNG. People are a little bit surprised about both the BEB and the renewable natural gas. Renewable natural gas, this kind of negative emissions is because it avoids or removes embodied emissions more than it produces. So what that essentially means is renewable natural gas is being produced in the market, the retail market, by food stocks that are biomass, agriculture-based, livestock-based, that would ordinarily pour certain emissions into the atmosphere that the process of renewable natural gas removes. This, again, is the retail. The renewable natural gas that will in the future be produced by the water pollution treatment plant is totally different because the base of it is totally different. So this figure would, of course, change if in the future we were to partially or wholly go to renewable natural gas, and we were solely using what was produced out of the water pollution treatment plant. But again, this is a study, feasibility study for only those time-sensitive decisions. That decision has not been made yet. So when you see this, it is true that it would have to be recalculated for the RNG produced by the water pollution treatment plant, but in the retail market, this is accurate. Next, please. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimley, the team at Kimley Horn.
Yeah, thanks, Demetra. So there were three main technologies assessed, those being renewable natural gas, battery electric bus, BEB for short, and fuel cell electric bus, FCEB, as we'll reference to. RNG is technically a low emission. BEB and FCEB are zero emission if you are looking strictly at tailpipe emissions. Evaluating clean emissions can definitely get more gray if you look at the entire manufacturing process, as Demetra had explained in the previous slide there. Refueling, RNG is pretty quick, same as CNG. Hydrogen is very similar, actually, in that it's measured in minutes, not hours. Battery electric buses, however, is the outlier here, in that it takes numerous hours to charge, depending on the type of charger and size of the vehicle you want to charge. From a training perspective, specific to the Arlington fleet staff, no new training would be required for RNG, unlike both electric and hydrogen, which would require new training for both the vehicles and equipment. In addition, with the range limitations currently on electric technology, there would be additional route modifications required for planning staff to accommodate those range limitations as well. Similarly, with infrastructure, no new infrastructure required for RNG, unlike electric or hydrogen technologies. Battery electric buses would need chargers, power modules, switchgear, transformers, and potentially even BESS, which is a battery energy storage systems, or generators on site to accommodate resiliency if the grid goes down. Hydrogen would require on-site storage and or on-site production, which, like electric infrastructure, requires space for that equipment. Unlike electric, however, hydrogen would be similar to RNG in that it has a bit more flexibility in general with on-site bus layout and parking, whereas with the electric buses requiring charging dispensers for each parking stall, limiting your parking layout options a bit there. So next slide. National benchmarking. As part of the study, we reached out to numerous agencies across the country. In general, California is more established on the zero emission front. AC Transit, for example, has been in the game for over 15 years now, with both hydrogen FCEBs and electric BEBs in their fleet. Sunline also has been in the hydrogen space for a while. They are actually both manufacturing and selling hydrogen to the general public now. And I think this will be much more common in the future. Just a couple of months ago, legislation was passed in the state of Washington to allow public agencies the ability there to sell fuel for profit as well. And their end game, of course, is to establish and construct infrastructure to produce hydrogen and then sell to other agencies and general public. So there's numerous agencies up there that are looking at this as a very viable option for them. Next slide. Here are just a few more details on some of the current and planned fleet mixes of these agencies that were contacted. AC Transit is a dual technology agency having both BEB and FCEB buses. I recently completed design renovations actually for both their Division 2 and Division 4 facilities to add another 70 battery electric buses to their fleet, which should be delivered in 2025. As you can see with Foothill, another agency with about equal numbers, electric and hydrogen. One other agency not on here, but we recently completed design for Napa Valley Transportation Authority's new operation and maintenance facility. That'll be complete in about 3 months or so. This is kind of interesting because it was originally designed for a battery electric focused facility, but then the agency learned they were going to have hydrogen available down the road. And so quickly, we actually retrofitted the bus bay designs to accommodate hydrogen FCEB buses as well. And this, I think, on a national level, I have to say it's probably the growing theme in that with the current limitations on battery range for buses, as well as potential grid limitations with power, potential unreliability during catastrophic events, the grid going down, and resiliency concerns, the majority of agencies I've worked with, talked to, or even just listened to at different conferences, they seem resolved to the fact that they're going to go with like a dual technology fleet. That is to say BEB and FCEB, or combo with natural gas as well. Having that dual technology approach helps check those range issues for the long express routes, resiliency concerns, and if anything, buys them more time just to see how each of these technologies plays out in the next decade or so, right? So the tech and the costs on these will continue to change, and right now, there really isn't a clear winner yet. Next slide. From a regional perspective, there were numerous agencies we reached out to as well. Arlington has had many discussions with DASH, DC Circulator, Montgomery County, WMATA, and others to obtain lessons learned, as well as the benefits and challenges related to implementing ZEB pilots. Such information has been used to help the programming of BEBs at the ART Operations and Maintenance Facility, which is under construction. Several regional partners have noted that they are looking at an agnostic approach to ZEB in terms of future bus purchase planning exercises. Many are seeking to obtain data from their ZEB pilot, as well as monitoring the advancements in technology prior to committing to a ZEB technology for the future. So several agencies are piloting both BEBs and FCEBs. Next slide. I'm going to pass it to Roan.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so as part of the study, we also looked at the ART facilities and the impacts of transitioning to zero emission would have on the light maintenance facility, LMF, as well as the ART operation and maintenance facility, as Peter mentioned, which is under construction, AOMF. And so adding zero emission bus infrastructure takes extra space, as Peter alluded to, and so that will typically result in a reduction of parking or storage spaces for buses. And these facilities are based on current fleet service levels, so that can have an impact in the future. And with battery electric buses, power upgrades likely be required at the facilities, and fleet size would exceed current capacity for storage. And for hydrogen, for FCEBs, would result in a possible redesign of the LMF and a retrofit of the AOMF maintenance bays for hydrogen detection, which is a pretty simple process just to make sure that the bus bays are safe in case hydrogen can collect inside. So for LMF, we analyzed a couple of different options for developing a battery electric or a fuel cell electric layout. The site is pretty constrained, as shown in this image on the right, and current conditions allows for 37 CNG buses to be parked and stored here, as well as it operates as the full CNG fueling center for the whole fleet. And with option 2 for battery electric buses, you would reduce storage for buses down to 29, and then for option 3, down to 26 to incorporate a fueling center for hydrogen as well as for CNG until you can replace those. And then as for AOMF, the design was already under, or it was already under design when we started our study, but we worked with the other consultant doing the design to provide a third-party review for Arlington, as well as making sure that their plans would align with what our study is saying as well. And so with battery electric buses, it can store up to 63 buses, and for fuel cells or RNG, it could do 66. The difference again being reduction in parking for additional battery electric bus charging infrastructure. And with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thanks, Rowan. As Demetra mentioned previously, RNG is a fueling process for CNG buses that's been adopted by several major transit agencies, including MTA in New York and LA Metro. The plan for the ART fleet is there will be a transition by 2029 to RNG generation at Arlington's wastewater treatment plant, which is conveniently located next to the LMF. Bus purchases in the interim will be RNG, and there's currently a contract in place with Clean Energy to fuel them. Now, I won't go into detail in the process, but as Demetra mentioned, RNG is biogas derived from organic waste that Arlington will take from the wastewater treatment plant, and as mentioned, takes more carbon out of the environment than it produces. Next slide. As part of the ZEB study, the team evaluated various implementation scenarios for the fleet transition and developed the following timeline. This year, starting this year to 2028, buses requiring replacement will be replaced with CNG buses fueled by RNG. By 2025, 4 BEB pilots are deployed that were purchased this year that will expand the fleet. And also 8 RNG buses are deployed as part of the useful life replacement of CNGs. By 2026, 2 to 4 FCEB pilots are deployed, also expanding the fleet. And again, 8 additional RNG buses are deployed as part of the useful life replacement of CNGs. By 2028, which we're calling the decision year, ART would select the preferred ZEB technology and fleet transition scenario. By that year, ART would be ceasing to purchase fossil fuel buses, i.e. CNG or any other fossil fuel buses. By 2029, the Arlington Wastewater Treatment Facility RNG capture system would have been completed the prior year in 2028, and all remaining CNGs in ART's fleet would be fueled with RNG. And then by 2038, ART would reach 100% zero-emission bus fleet. Note that this is a living document and subject to the results of the pilots. So the decision year could include changing the approach, i.e. continuing to use RNGs in some capacity. Next slide. So as part of the technical analysis of developing the implementation scenarios, a primary consideration was to evaluate the range performance of BEBs at different conditions. And our technical team completed route modeling in the fall of 2022, which assessed whether the range could meet the mileage of a block of trips, defined roughly to be equal to 1 operator shift. And if the range is less than that, shorter blocks are then developed, which result in inefficiencies and more cost to operate. The route modeling results then informed the implementation scenario 2 development. Next slide. So as you can see, the BEBs were assessed at different conditions with AC and heat and resulted in various success rates on completing the blocks with an estimate of how many additional buses would be needed to be 100% successful in completing the blocks. It is worth noting in footnote 4 that 4 pilot BEBs now purchased by Arlington County have a higher battery capacity, 588 kilowatt hours and 686 kilowatt hours, than the modeling scenarios utilized. And newer size batteries may change these results. Also, for footnote 3, on-route charging was evaluated at the listed locations in Charlington and Pentagon City, and may prove challenging to implement broadly due to grid capacity considerations. Next slide. So the study looked at 3 primary implementation scenarios. The first scenario, scenario 1, was battery electric bus fleet at a 2-to-1 replacement ratio. So 2 BEBs would replace 1 CNG bus, and that is based on a worst case scenario due to range limitations and midday bus changeout. Scenario number 2 is that the BEB fleet would be replaced at a 1.59, we ran it to 1.6 to 1 replacement ratio. 1.6 BEBs replace 1 CNG bus. And that accounts for 46 additional buses for a winter date determined by route modeling. Scenario number 3, the fuel cell electric bus fleet would replace at a 1-to-1 replacement ratio. So 1 FCEB bus replaces 1 CNG bus. Next slide. So for scenario 2, this slide shows the planned fleet size over time against the facility capacity coming online. A key assumption is that the LMF is retrofitted to open the year the AOMF capacity is exceeded. As you can see, both the total fleet and the BEB fleet exceeds the facility capacity and the BEB facility capacity, respectively, by the year 2034. Note this assumes a 2 FCEB pilot size. This pilot were expanded to 4 FCEBs. The total fleet would exceed the total facilities capacity as early as 2031. Next slide. So in scenario 3, CNG buses are replaced at a 1-to-1 ratio with FCEBs. Again, a key assumption is that the LMF is retrofitted to open the year AOMF capacity is exceeded. Note again that this scenario assumes a 2 FCEB pilot size. If this were expanded to 4 FCEBs, there are no facilities impacts being exceeded. Next slide. There's a lot of information on the slide, but essentially provides comparative cost in current 2023 dollars for the baseline RNG and each of the implementation scenarios. The RNG baseline is for an 86 bus fleet, 78 buses, 4 BEBs, the buses, CNG buses, 4 BEBs, and 4 FCBs. Cost was from today through the 2038 timeframe. Each of the vehicle costs were from Virginia contracts with various manufacturers and are represented as baseline costs without additional agency-specified equipment, branding, or technology. The battery electric bus cost was used of $954,900, and the FCEB purchase cost was $1,259,600. As Peter noted, the market is very dynamic, and there's a great deal of uncertainty with the future of costs for fleet. But in order to achieve a zero emissions bus fleet will certainly require a significant amount of investment. Again, this does not include any additional land purchase costs that could be required. Next slide. As we've discussed, there are a number of variables and risks that go into developing and evaluating the various implementation scenarios. We've discussed cost and the potential challenges of on-route charging based on the operability and capacity of the grid. In addition, we know that space constraints in Arlington pose significant challenges in land acquisition and constructing any additional storage or maintenance facilities. And we know that if additional service is contemplated either in ART's transit strategic plan or as a result of WMATA's Better Bus Network redesign, additional fleet and facilities could be required. Next slide. The above graphic shows the comparative effort and cost to implement for each propulsion method as fleet size increases. As you can see, hydrogen fuel cell becomes more cost effective with more vehicles. There is a higher initial capital cost per bus for initial deployments, but that decreases as each additional bus is added to the fleet. And as noted previously, FCEBs also address range and topography considerations. BEBs scale with deployment size with additional chargers required for every new bus added and the potential for additional grid expansion needed, but also do not have requirements for fuel generation or deliveries. With several BEB implementation efforts active and ongoing with peer agencies, there is also currently more BEB experience being implemented to draw from, although additional FCBs are currently in the pipeline by agencies that we noted slated for development. Next slide. So as a result of these considerations, the study identified the following near-term recommendations. So in 2023 and 24, where we are now, deploy replacement of CNG buses. Also this year, be identified the means of supplying RNG on new CNG buses. By 2025, purchased this year in 2023, to pilot 4 BEBs and commission first increment of BEBs. By next year, 2024, establish workforce training programs on zero-emission buses. In 2023 and 24, align funding request of next fiscal budget cycle with the implementation plan. By 25 and 26, continue purchase of RNG fuel buses for state of good repair. And by 2026, with a planned purchase in 2024, pilot between 2 to 4 SCEBs. Next slide. Additionally, the following midterm recommendations were developed. By 2025 to 2028, complete the AOMF to further accommodate the ZEB transition. By 2028, select a ZEB for full fleet development and deployment. By 2029, deploy RNG from the Arlington Municipal Wastewater Treatment Facility. Also by 29, prepare design of the LMF for selected ZEB and identify area for swing space. And starting in 28, continue to transition CNG replacement buses to zero-emission buses. And by 28, identify and program in the CIP additional facility space for the full fleet. And finally, the following long-term recommendations were developed. By 2034, complete the transition of the LMF to accommodate ZEBs. Also by 2034, construct additional facility for the full fleet. And by 2038, transition the fleet to 100% zero-emission buses. Next, Demetra.
Sorry, I just had to come back on with my mic. Communications, this is just a brief summary of the outreach and the communications that have been done both internally and externally, and obviously with primary stakeholders, including this evening's presentation. Next, please. And next steps, obviously, are to present the ZEB study to the joint TAC, that's this evening, and to brief the county board on the ZEB study. And with that, I believe our next slide, we're going to open it up to questions. So if people could raise their hand. Okay. As I said, we're going to try and alternate these among the different committees and commissions. So Joan, why don't you go first, followed by Chris Slatt?
Yeah, looking at the scenarios I'm curious as to why you didn't do a scenario with the 550s with auxiliary heat using diesel. Obviously, that would not be the ideal solution. And actually, these buses now can be fitted with heat pump technology, which probably would get you the most gains. But, given the fact that when you did it with the 440, you got a 90% completion of route blocks, the one would assume with the 550, and certainly with the new buses that have been purchased, which are even higher capacity, then you're at over 100. You've hit 100% of route block pairings based on the methodology you're doing. So it would seem, and there also, since there's a lot of other options in terms of fleet management as to ways of getting to a one-to-one replacement with BEBs, even with the existing technologies.
I'm going to let Kimberly Horn answer more about the developments in the market, but I think that when we started, everybody needs to remember that we started this around 3 years ago. There was a delay while we accommodated C2E2 in the change of our procurement and our consultant. So at that time, we didn't have the larger batteries to incorporate in the initial study. The other
no,
thing
but
that is,
Demetra, I'm asking about the 550.
I'm getting to there. I'm getting to there, Joan. The larger battery buses are quote unquote available, but the ability to actually reliably purchase, and I'm going to look to Kimberly Horn and to Pierre, those buses, we're even finding that with the regular, the smaller battery size buses, particularly aggravated by the issues with Proterra, that we're being told that the delivery dates may be pushed back even further on the ones that we have ordered. So if Kimley Horn could maybe talk a little bit more about the market and the availability of the larger ones.
I think just Paul, if one of your team could address specifically, I think though what Joan's getting at specific is the modeling with the 550, because I know you modeled them and you modeled them in winter and summer and it made a big difference. But if one of your staff can just speak to that briefly and then just follow along with exactly what Demetra said on availability and market.
Yeah, I'm really asking about why you didn't model
Right.
with the
Gotcha.
auxiliary heat.
Well, we did want to model too, but we weren't sure we could get. So, Paul, if your team can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, there's obviously an infinite amount of combinations, permutations. We did the 440 with auxiliary heat, and as you saw, that had a 92.5% success rate. The thought process is if you went to a 550, the success rate would improve. It would probably, come closer to 100%, if not at 100%. So we just selected a finite amount of scenarios for the modeling. Obviously, you can model every combination of heat, AC, on-route charging, all of that. So.
Yeah, but the thing is you're trying to get to a combination that would actually allow you to replace the buses at a 1-to-1 ratio. And if you get 100%, that's a 1-to-1 ratio.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mike,
if you're talking, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jen. I think at the time of this study, though, and I would just say this, and Paul and Peter, someone can jump on Kimley Horn. They did. I think the challenge with that is the winter. If you go with the diesel, obviously we didn't want to do that, Joan. So that type of auxiliary heating component we weren't very favorable of. And so if you go winter without that type of auxiliary heat and has to rely on battery, that's when you get more of the failed blocks. And when you speak to, at least at the time of this study, Joan, the heat pumps were not commercially available in transit buses. So I could, one of our transit team can come on, but I know the marketing people can tell you that technology exists, but it wasn't available at the time of this study.
And
so Peter,
Paul, can I ask for a clarification? I may be wrong, but I thought that we are going to be modeling those obviously in greater detail as we move forward, but we're also going to have to take into account the expanded infrastructure for the larger battery buses as well, and space and other cost and operational impacts of that. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, that's our understanding too. Just for the block route modeling, that's just one component of it. But obviously, the larger bus battery sizes have other considerations that have to be taken account within the maintenance facility. So that's just one piece of it, is the route modeling for it.
Thank you. Chris Slack.
Thank you. I'm trying to get a handle on the safety implications here. Can you talk about the kind of weight differences? How much a fuel cell bus weighs versus a battery electric bus weighs versus the existing buses that we have on the road? There's a very known safety impact of weight, and it always comes out poorly for the lighter thing that's running into the thing on our streets. Just trying to get a handle on how much more weight we're talking about on some of these larger vehicles that are on our roads.
Can Kimley Horn respond to that, please?
Yeah, I'll ask Peter if you have any, proportional knowledge of what, increasing battery sizes have on the overall weight of those vehicles. Is it a 1-to-1% increase of the battery size per weight?
Well, yeah, I think the question is in regards to overall weight of battery electric and FCEB versus like a diesel bus, right? And I mean, I don't know off the top of my head the weight difference between battery electric and FCEVs. They're both heavier than a standard diesel, not substantially, but the battery electric, the BEV and the FCEV are pretty similar just because even fuel cell electric bus, I mean, it still has fuel cells on the bus, which are heavy, right? So similar to a battery electric bus. You know, I have not really heard any concerns from the industry, from any agencies or general public at large in regards to, or any history of safety issues pertaining to weight or stopping ability. These buses are designed with pretty heavy duty braking systems in place. Honestly, the bigger issue becomes with the weight of these vehicles becomes the infrastructure themselves that they're running on. And the ability of the pavement sections to withstand those added easel loadings. So that's kind of a larger issue that I think needs to be addressed, particularly in the facilities themselves, but also where the buses stop en route, at bus stops, the pavement degradation, cracking, things like that can become an issue if it's not properly designed to accommodate these types of buses that are a little bit heavier. So.
Okay, I see Stephanie followed by Adam Theo.
Thanks. So slide 5 lists a bunch of assumptions that were made in the study, but it was missing what I think is like the single biggest assumption that was made in this study. And it's shown in slide 7 in the footnote. The footnote says that we are assuming that the hydrogen will be green, which I find a massive assumption. And in Appendix D, it says that this was based on some conversation with Washington Gas that they said, yeah, all hydrogen will be green. Less than 1% of hydrogen produced in the United States today is green. 99% of it is made from fossil fuel, and it's extremely dirty. It's actually dirtier than using natural gas. So it makes all the difference in the world what type of hydrogen we are using in these buses. It's the difference between, fighting climate change or making climate change worse. So I want to understand, why did we make that assumption that we would have some guaranteed supply of green hydrogen?
The assumption, and I'll ask Peter or Paul to add on to this, but just to start off the response, is that the federal government was already in the process, had set aside a very significant amount of money for kind of their moonshot promotion or jumpstart of the hydrogen infrastructure. And those awards, those initial awards, literally just were made, I think, in the last 2 weeks. I think that actually Fairfax, if I recall, is also announced that they're looking into drawing a hydrogen line. And Pierre knows the location, and it's escaping me right now. But it's not Washington Gas, so it's other regional and super regional producers. Obviously we don't think that the board would accept anything less than green hydrogen, and we're also looking at the quick emergence of white hydrogen as well.
It's just funny because it says we're using just technology that's available today. We make we use very conservative assumptions about the development of battery technology, and yet we make this huge assumption about the development of this moonshot kind of program for green hydrogen that just currently it does not exist. There is very little green hydrogen produced in the United States today. So I just think that we should.
No, you're right, but I think, Stephanie, too, that it is being routed towards transportation. A lot of the other forms of hydrogen are being used for manufacturing and industrial uses. But I will again turn it over to Kimley Horn if that is not correct.
Yes, Dimitri, if I could just add, I think it's a great point you're raising, Stephanie. Mm-hmm. I think it's just like the grid. There's going to be a transition. I mean, the grid's only 11-15% renewable right now, depending upon what you're looking at. We have been given the county's already been given quotes for green hydrogen for possible FCEB deployment. So, but I would say the two areas that have been awarded are the Western Virginia and the Pennsylvania hub, and then there's an Appalachian hub out in the Shenandoah Valley that are the recipients of those hub grants from the federal government. But I think it's a point. It is not. It's being developed as we speak. But we have recently gotten quotes for green hydrogen. So I wouldn't say it wasn't available. It's not available. I think the concern there might be the price point was up in the high teens, almost $20 per kilogram. But we're seeing those prices quoting much lower now. So just wanted to add that from the county's real-time experience here.
And I noticed in slide 22, you have the cost per mile of fuel cell buses. That cost estimate, I looked at the source of that estimate, and that is based on, the current hydrogen, gray hydrogen. Like, I feel like if you're going to assume that we're using green hydrogen, that cost estimate needs to be adjusted for the price premium of green hydrogen, which is at least 4 times more expensive than gray hydrogen.
Thank you for pointing that out, Stephanie. We're going to Paul, Peter, unless the projection was done based on anything else, we'll have to go back and verify that.
But we can verify that, that's from the NREL publication, the fuel cell buses.
NREL,
yeah. So we'll check to verify what that number came from.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and obviously, as I think we just mentioned, there's 7 new clean hydrogen hubs that were just announced that are going to be in line within the next 6 or 7 years. More than $7 billion in funding for those. So, the current price of green hydrogen is obviously going to drop as that supply increases. So what that price goes down to it's really hard to say, right? It's speculation. But I think as more hydrogen comes online, particularly green hydrogen, it will drop. But it's kind of a guessing game to get exact numbers though at this point. So.
Yeah, I think just to tie this off with Stephanie, because we are talking about near term and not projecting too far out and being too hypothetical. So if we could just double check that the projection of the maintenance cost per mile and the fueling cost per mile is aligned with green hydrogen and not any other form of hydrogen, that would be helpful. I'm making a note of that. Adam Theo, you've been patient. You're next.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I understand the study is limited by the key assumptions and that this is the zero emission bus study, but could there potentially be a modeling in the near future of simply adding new renewable natural gas or CNG buses from 2030 onward instead of replacing with battery electric or fuel cell electric? Wondering, in order to maximize the number of buses in the fleet to reach higher frequencies and broader route coverage as soon as possible. Wondering if that would have the end result of reducing carbon emissions more throughout the community than just simply replacing existing fleet with zero emission. After all, if we can get a much greater percentage of our residents using the bus, even if they are CNG or RNG, wouldn't that potentially have a greater impact on reducing carbon emissions?
Well, again, Mike, you want to take that?
I'll just answer that. Adam, appreciate that question. I think one of the goals, obviously, of our transit system is to reduce the reliance on single occupancy vehicles. So the approach and the high level goal there is appreciated. I think as was stated before by Kimberly Horn, we're going to be piloting the zero emission bus technologies because as much as we're using CNG currently and even RNG, they are not technically zero emission tailpipe technology. So I think, though, what was said earlier, after we pilot these, we could be in a situation potentially that we want to go back and look at more of an extended use of RNG or CNG, especially in a transitionary more of a transition to get there, perhaps depending upon how the market matures. I'm not sure we want to invest in modeling it right now, but I think it could very well come about as part of our piloting, looking at the scenarios for our fleet in the future. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Joan, and then June Locker, and then Greg. Joan McIntyre, is that a vestigial hand?
I think that's her hand still up from previously, Demetra. If you want to go to Greg.
Okay, then can we go to Greg Bozak and then June Locker?
Yeah, hi, everybody. I just wanted to ask or make a statement on using hydrogen for fuel. Even though we have some hydrogen coming online, the competition for hydrogen use is going to be extremely high. Hydrogen will likely be the technology of choice for both trucks and for airlines in the future. So the price is not going to come down. If anything, it's going to go up. And getting green hydrogen at the levels that are needed for commercial vehicles and for airlines is just, it is a huge undertaking. And so I'm not sure that you're going to have access to the hydrogen that you think you're going to have.
Okay, Greg, thank you. We'll make a note of that and go back and I'll double check with Mike and with the transit fleet on the arrangements that were put into place for an FCEV pilot. Obviously, the pilot is smaller scale, so we're not talking about large amounts, but we'll double check on that. June Locker.
I just had a quick question on in 2028 as the county is making their decision on recommendation for the transition plan. I noticed you have about 8 key factors. I just wanted to get a better understanding of number 1, the condition and maintainability of the 16 remaining Navi buses in the fleet. I was wondering how that kind of plays into into the decision making. So I just wanted to highlight that, as for at least my main concern is to make sure that the level of service and reliability is not impacted. And I think that should be kind of highlighted as maybe should be highlighted as like the number 1, number 2 priority as we're also making that, decision that this is actually implementable and is not going to be affecting people who are riding transit.
Yeah, June, I would just Pierre Holloman or Lynn Rivers, who are on our transit team, could backstop this, but I just answer real succinctly on this one is we are very concerned about the Navi buses. The 16 remaining ones are buses we want to replace. We currently have them scheduled to be replaced out in the FY26, FY27 timeframe. 8 buses in each fiscal year. So that is a big concern because they are not supported. Those parts are not supported. But I think we were given the 15 buses that we're replacing this year that have already been ordered will assist. And now we've got to replace the remaining half of them. And those are currently scheduled for 26 and 27. We are considering trying to accelerate those replacements perhaps by a year. But that's something we're going to have to see financially between grants and our capability of funding if we can accelerate that. So, Pierre, do you want to add anything? I saw you hop on.
I think you covered it all.
Thanks.
Are we good? Okay, John Bloom.
Yeah, hi. I guess the question I have is basically echoing a letter that a number of environmental groups wrote a few weeks ago, and that is, there's a difference between looking at tailpipe emissions which is one consideration, and looking more broadly at climate impact of a decision like this. And we would favor considering climate impact as the most important consideration, more important than tailpipe emissions alone. And the issue with hydrogen is that it requires significantly a multiple of energy to move a bus with hydrogen than using electricity directly. And that's just a matter of having to take the electricity in the first place, convert it to hydrogen, compress it, move it around, and switch it back to electricity to move the bus. So all that extra energy use translates to a lot of additional use of renewable electricity, which for at least the next 30 years is going to be a very scarce resource. So we're concerned about devoting so much renewable electricity to a use that can be easily electrified. And I'm wondering if you all have developed a response to that letter, or can share some, your sense of what the energy use difference is between hydrogen and battery electric. Thanks.
Yeah, Peter, maybe turn to you, Kimley-Horn. Peter, if you had any perspective on that with your experience in California. I think it is a fair question. I think we've got multiple factors we're trying to consider, John, in this study as it's been presented. But Peter, you have anything you want to share there?
Yeah, a couple of things. So per the previous conversation on hydrogen, there's obviously all the different colors of hydrogen. Green in particular, obviously, is what we're shooting for. The hydrogen hubs that are being built in California and Washington are going to be green arches. So that there's that kind of variable to inlay in there. As far as battery electric goes and looking at the full kind of environmental impact for delivering that power, again, it varies region by region. Is it coal powered electricity? Is it hydro powered? Is it solar? Is it wind? So that can vary obviously place by place. Mining of lithium is becoming a big issue right now with battery that a lot of people take issue with as well from environmental impacts as far as batteries go. So it really does, vary, I think, location by location. So it's hard to really, look at, any one, scenario over the other, I think. FTA, in terms of funding, fair or not, looks at just tailpipe emissions, right? They don't look at the full, manufacturing components involved with hydrogen and electric. They look at tailpipe, which is technically just hydrogen and electric, right? And that's where majority of the funding's going, is FCEB and BEB because of that. I'm not an expert when it comes to the production of electricity, but it just depends. So,
John, can I ask a just clarifying question? And I know that other people have their hand up, and I think June had a follow-up question that I may have missed. But I read the letter, and could you clarify whether the nonprofit and environmental foundations are referring to modeling just only the electricity use involved, or are you talking about cradle to grave?
So in the letter,
it's hard to separate out just the electricity involved in a technology,
I believe the letter and the graphic in the letter addressed electricity use. That is, starting with electrolysis through use in the battery in the case of hydrogen.
Right, but I'm talking about basically all life cycle environmental impacts, because the letter also referred to environmental impacts, and I just wanted to be sure that I was interpreting it the way it was intended.
Well, there are certainly lots of other things we could look at. We were talking about energy use as the, you know, the main metric that we were concerned about, and that is, you know, a multiple of energy use for hydrogen versus direct electricity use in a bus through battery electric.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thanks.
Yeah, so an ideal situation is what a couple agencies do, you know, in California. Sunline, for instance, they produce their own hydrogen on site. They do it via, you know, an array of solar panels that they have dozens of acres, because there's a lot of space out there in Coachella Valley. You know, they could do that. AC Transit also produces on site their own hydrogen, so they also minimize you know, delivery and that full life cycle costs and environmental impact. But again, they use just the local PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric power, and that can vary by location on how green that really is, right? So,
thank you, Peter. There are a lot of hands up from C2E2 and the Energy Committee, and we're trying to alternate. So I see Chris has his hand up, but before that, June, did you have a follow-up question? I thought I saw your hand go up again.
I didn't, no.
Okay,
Thanks.
so Chris Slatt and then Claire Noakes.
Thanks. I just want, I don't know, the whole previous question about like looking at this from more of a full climate standpoint just led me back to Commissioner Theo's question earlier, which is like, I'm just looking at these fleet replacement costs and the, you know, the cost to re-outfit our maintenance facility to deal with these new technologies, and thinking it's insane to be making this commitment and conversation without understanding, like, if we spent this money on RNG buses where we could get more buses with better range for less money and a lower operating cost, how many more people could we get out of their cars, and what would that tailpipe emissions savings be? I just feel like we are ultimately missing the forest for the trees in this conversation by not looking at that other massive source of tailpipe emissions and a very known and reliable way to reduce it, which is to give people, you know, another way to get around. So it's not even a question. I just bumped on it again and couldn't not bring it up, though I appreciate Commissioner Theo bringing it up earlier. So thank you.
Thank you, both of you. Claire?
Yeah, hi. I guess I share some incredulity, but probably from for a different reason than Chris. I feel like I've heard Mark Schwartz say over and over again, we don't like to be early adopters of technology. We want it to be, you know, tried and true and proven. And that's why we're not going to jump into something, a lot of times electric vehicles. We want it to be proven. And yet here we are in this other, you know, parallel universe, doing the opposite of what I hear Mark Schwartz say over and over again. And further, we're doing it heading into a fiscal financial storm from all that I'm hearing. And so suddenly we are projecting to be willing to spend 1.2 million on very cutting edge, possibly not actually attainable fuel cell buses, when we were not willing to pay the delta when we were flush with cash a few years ago on battery electric. So could anyone talk a little bit about how this study lands in the real world?
Yeah, Claire, I would just say that we are considering cost as part of this, and that's why if you looked at the benchmark slide they showed for both regional and national benchmarks show transit agencies not only just nationally but regionally trying these technologies, but we are not suggesting that we just go full bore without a pilot that would inform, and that's one of the slides here that was just put up on the screen. That 2028 decision, we want to be based in real data, real metrics on what the emissions look like, cost, range, what the multiple metrics that we're going to be looking at to make this a smart decision and actually align and try to balance our need to have reliable transit service for our customers, but also to try to meet our sustainability goals. And that's the tension and the tough part about this as we try to wade into the zero emission bus technology. But we just purchased 4 BEBs. And so there was a commitment to try that technology on, and we're contemplating a ZEB technology also pilot, but that's yet to be determined. But at this point, and I would say this too, is the purchase of those buses are leveraged with state funds and can possibly be leveraged with federal funds. So it's not just county local dollars, and that's not saying that a dollar is a dollar. We understand that, but we're trying to do it in a manner that's fiscally prudent, but also to try to achieve multiple goals here. So that's what I would say. Kimberly Horn may have to have something else to add there.
Well, probably not, since it's such a county policy question. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
And the only thing, Claire, I would add to that is we're in a CIP update coming up this spring. We're already engaging internally on that, and we're going to have to look at what this study and how it informs our transit team is going to have to work very closely with our DOT team and our financial team inside the county to see how it impacts our capital improvement for bus replacements, because there is going to be an impact. So we're not trying to run from that. We want to be transparent about it, but we also are trying to achieve multiple goals in this process. So,
Well, I'll just be disappointed if it is announced later on, oh, surprise, we don't have 1.2 million per bus. Let's just replace everything with the existing CNG for a lot cheaper. I mean, we should prepare for that possibility and think through, what are we doing here? Thank you.
okay.
Well,
Thank you.
Mike,
Claire.
I think it's real important, and then I want to go because I see Joan and John have their hands up again. But correct me again if I'm wrong, but I thought that the buses for the pilots in particular were not going to be part of the service fleet during the pilots, but they were going to be additional in order to, again, track and record all the metrics and operation and functionality. Is that correct or
Yeah.
no?
Pierre, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, all the buses that are being purchased as far as a pilot, they will be in service because we need to see how they actually operate on all of the routes and all the blocks. So we want to put them to the test to see what works and what doesn't work. So yes, there is going to be an initial testing period for operators, but all the buses before receiving in 2025, those will be put on all the routes and all the blocks.
And the pilots, Pierre, I would just add the pilots are expansion of the fleet. They are not replacement buses. So at this point.
And I'm going, let me see, can we jump? I'm trying to catch people who have had their hand up for a while. So Elizabeth, followed by Kevin Vincent, and then Doug. Elizabeth, you're muted if you're talking. Okay, Kevin.
Hey, Demetra. The study had on page 22 a comparison of the fuel cost of CNG per mile against battery electric. It was very surprising to me. Can you pull that page back up?
Ron, yeah, if we could, thank you.
So it's got So this just came from, I just pulled up the Foothills Transit Agency's study in 2021. So this was just lifted right out of there, or was there, I was just curious where what the basis was for those costs.
Kevin, did you see the update to the NREL study that included the Foothills Agency, the 2023 update? Because I believe the 2021, as you've noted, was comparing CNG to, I don't think it was even RNG, I think it was CNG
right
to BEB, and then the 2023 update compared BEB to FCEB. So I don't know if there's anything out of NREL that I'm aware of that compares RNG and BEB.
Yeah, and anyway, I just would question those numbers because again, it's identical to what's in the Foothill one, which is comparing CNG. But at any rate, I don't know the numbers there. I just want to make sure we're not using inaccurate numbers as a basis for our determination there.
Well, we're going back and checking, double checking these figures anyway, regarding the FCEB to make sure that it was aligned with green hydrogen and not any other form of it. So we'll double check those as well.
Thanks.
Doug?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm Doug Snowinboss. I'm chair of the Energy Committee, member of C2E2, and I'm new to all this space, so I apologize if my question seems ignorant. But I was confused by factual matter in Paul's section of the presentation. There's two concepts here. There's CNG, which I understand stands for compressed natural gas, and then there's RNG, which is renewable natural gas. And I understood that the current Arlington buses that are driving around now are on compressed natural gas, which is being purchased, I assume, from a company called Washington Gas. But there's also talk about at some point, or maybe already it's happened, I don't understand, switching over to RNG, which is going to be obtained from a facility that the county operates. And there's also talk about a contract with a company called Clean Energy. So could somebody just please clarify this? Thank you.
Yeah, Doug, I'll attempt to jump in since that's more of a county specific, and Lynn Rivers is on the call too, but she's the Transit Bureau Chief. We currently do, as you said, run CNG. We ordered 15 CNG buses, but when they come in, we plan to execute, in process of executing a contract with Clean Energy, who is a current vendor of ours at the light maintenance facility. And we are transacting with them for RNG, renewable natural gas. They sell that, and it's a byproduct of agricultural waste. And so we're able to purchase that. And so that our buses, when they come in as compressed natural gas, they'll be fueled. So it's just a fueling change. We don't have to change buses. We can just contract for that renewable natural gas. Now, as explained in the presentation, our water pollution control plant is doing a solids upgrade. And when they do that solids upgrade, they're planning to deploy anaerobic digestion, which is in that process, they will have gas byproduct that they plan to sell in the pipeline to Washington Gas. But in that process, they will be producing renewable natural gas that we could contract with our own water pollution control plant to provide to the ARC fleet at the light maintenance facility. So that's what this is trying to explain. I know there's a lot of moving parts, but we have a source in 2029 that could be kind of turnkey in the county, which we like, that could provide actual natural gas we could transact with right here in Arlington County.
So I just want to make sure I understand, Mike, because there was some confusion, or at least I was confused. So right now we're buying CNG from Washington Gas, but in 2029 we might be able to get RNG.
No, we will get RNG in the next 6 months on 15 buses that are coming in. That was part of the commitment when we bought those 15 CNG buses. We're also going to contract We'll still be buying gas from Washington Gas, but on top of that, we'll have a contract for renewable natural gas from another supplier called Clean Energy.
When you
So
say
we're
the
going to do that
15,
now.
when you say the 15 that are coming in, are those the 16 that are going to be purchased
No,
in 2025 and 2026, or are those 16 that are on order now for delivery in the next year or so?
There are 15 that are currently on order right now to come in.
So why can't RNG be used for the existing buses that are driving around now? Or maybe it can, we just don't have the RNG.
That's a great question. We looked into that, and right now the supplier could only guarantee provision for the 15 buses. So we're looking to expand that, but right now they were only able to guarantee contract with us for the 15 we ordered. There may be more supply, but that's the transitionary contract until we have the full capability potentially in 2029 with our plant.
Thank you very much for clarifying that, Mike.
Thanks.
Okay, I see Joan McIntyre and John Bloom.
Yeah, okay, and now actually my mic seems to work, which it wasn't before. Yeah, just, well, first I want to kind of come back to the question on climate change, and certainly 100% support with relooking at our whole transit system to make it more convenient and flexible so that it really can meet people where they are and really get them out of their cars, because that's critical. However, this is a crisis and it's not either or, it's all of the above solutions, so that we can't do this. I think the other thing kind of is, well, first a clarification question is for the fuel cell electric buses, when exactly do the orders need to go in to get to start the pilot? So, you know, what's the schedule on that purchase? And then the other question is, and I think we've been touching on a lot of this, is also the life cycle costs of BEBs versus hydrogen, and even compared to CNGs, is that at least theoretical, we're still in the earlier, you know, kind of early stages, but, you know, that the fuel, certainly the data that you're giving here is already, hydrogen is 4 times more than electricity. So that if it's going to cost us a lot less, and that's always going to be the case because hydrogen is extremely energy intensive. So it's always going to be the case that our fuel costs for electric buses are going to be less. And to what extent is the county looking and including in their estimates these life cycle costs of what's it going to cost not just to purchase the bus, but run them over their life cycle, and looking at with, you know, at least reasonable assessments and scenarios. And also the one clarification again is the price given on electricity, is that comparable to what Arlington would be paid? Because I got the sense it was just some broad benchmark nationwide.
I'm gonna, you know, yield to Kimley Horn if they have. Joan, I think you're right, but I think it's difficult because if you're talking particularly over a longer term, the status of the grid and in particular the cost of electricity. So for example, right now I know that VEPCO is struggling with Dominion over their proposed EVSE rider to the contract for charging vehicles. So I think that we're getting into so many variables in the market that it becomes difficult to accurately and objectively really gauge what could happen over the long term, because I think there are a lot of things that could happen, and depending on people's different perspectives, you know, the scenario could come out very differently. And right now it's a question of, you know, people, I think it was Clara mentioned the budget. It's hard for me to justify a lot of modeling that is that hypothetical. So I think it's hard. I think that we should probably put that on a list and see what we can reasonably tackle in a reliable fashion. You know, and if it's reliable and it's targeted, obviously it's more cost effective for us in the near term. But we'd like to continue the discussion with all of the commissions and committees, and obviously we'll have, FAC and other commissions weighing in on it. But I just think that right now it's incredibly difficult. Peter, if you're finding anything that people are doing that has a little bit more clarity and certainty and reliability to it over the long range, please let me know. And you're on mute, Peter.
All right. Sorry, Dimitri, specific to which technology then?
Well, Jen was talking about doing long-term scenario planning, comparative modeling and scenarios for electricity intensity and costs. Yeah. And I just think that right now there's just so much variability, even in your regular electrical grid costs, that I don't know if we can do that reliably.
It's tough. I mean, it's really tough. A lot of variables, like you mentioned. For instance, in California, the price escalation of power here has been astronomical year to year over the last 20 years, and it's probably going to continue. All I can say is, unfortunately, because FCEB, so hydrogen fuel cell electric buses, are relatively new in the market. Again, AC Transit was the first to have them 10, 15 years ago. There's not a lot of data points on, life cycle costs. I do know people are seeing generally 8 to 9 years on BEBs, where they have to replace the batteries, the entire battery system on those buses, and that's ranging, $400,000 to $450,000 now to do that. You can look internationally. Australia is couple of decades ahead in terms of hydrogen infrastructure than the rest of the world, and which is kind of surprising, but they are. There's probably more data points there, but unfortunately in the US, just not a lot. And obviously with the emerging market of hydrogen in general, and it's a mushrooming market at this point. It's going very quickly, very fast. It's impossible to predict. If I could, I would work in commodities and make billions of dollars, but I can't. So
yeah, just a follow up on that, Paul. Maybe I don't know if anyone on the call and your team could answer that, but did you all just use general electric cost for the what you showed for BEBs, or did you use specific cost for Arlington with our VEPCA contract?
I'll check with the team on that. I thought we used as local cost as we could for that, your provider. So.
Yeah. I mean, even with that, the cost in foothills is like 16 to 22 cents a kilowatt hour. And we're more like, for our business, we're probably 11 cents. And then we've got a little bit of a break on that for our Maplewood rider of probably 3 or 4 tenths of a cent. So it's just the variability of cost. We already spoken to it about, hydrogen, but electric is also variable. So a lot of things go into that. But to your point, Joan, I think you asked about your question on the FCEB pilot. We have got to go over this report. We're going to brief the report to the board. We're kind of backwards on this. Typically, we brief the board first on it, but we're running out of time. So that's one reason we did this joint meeting. We're going to brief the board on the ZEB study. And then at this point, it looks like we will be considering that as part of our FY25 grant. It's similar to what we briefed all three of the boards on last January. We had briefed on a FY25 pilot for FCEBs, and then at that time. So we're going to be doing the same thing, making decisions in that kind of timeline, January, February application for those FCBs if we move forward.
Okay, I'm doing just a time check, and I see that we're at 8:23. I do want to say before I go over to John, and I think Stephanie, if we could fit her in time-wise. Again, just repeating what I said at the beginning, we understand that there may be additional questions we don't get to tonight. There may be questions that come to people after the fact. We're willing to obviously respond to everything, whether it be in writing or whether it be in another session like this. So don't hesitate to come back to us with any additional feedback or questions you may have. But while we have 6 minutes left, John, and if we could answer yours, maybe Stephanie will have time for.
I'll try not to take the whole 6 minutes. First, I wanted to make sure that I heard correctly. Are we talking about briefing the board and basically January as the decision point on what goes into the DRPT request?
Yeah, trying to get off mute. The current approach is to do that, to have a briefing between now and then to make decisions, John. Yes.
Thanks. And then a comment and a question. And we've had a couple of our colleagues, talk about the need to expand service in art and how, and couldn't this money be used for that? And it's not a zero-sum game. I think all the commissions and environmental organizations support a strong and effective art bus system, expanded and, serving the community and getting people out of cars. And I see this as part of that. One of the top reports we get back, from communities that deploy these buses is that people love them. They love quiet, clean, the ones I'm familiar with are battery electric buses. And so, that's a comment. And then the other comment we've had is, boy, the costs are so high. And so this is a little bit more of a question. There was an interesting decision not to model BEBs at a 1-to-1 ratio. And the not getting to 1-to-1 is an artifact of assuming battery improvement over the next, between now and 2038, of assuming no heat pumps, even though they're already coming into the market, of assuming all kinds of things, assuming we're going to buy smaller batteries than we actually are. So why was the decision made not to model 1-to-1 as a scenario that, boy, if batteries improve a little bit over the years, we could get to 1-to-1 and show what that looks like? Because what that would look like, in answer to Chris's point about all the fleet costs and so forth, all those extra buses that are being loaded into the fleet costs disappear, and the need for extra space goes way down when you're replacing a 1-to-1. It's very similar to the FCEB scenario.
John, if I can just go, because I'm trying to get Stephanie in. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that. But real quick, I want to go back to a comment that I think Paul Ellman, followed up on, is it's important to pace how we modeled to where we are now with this study. As I said before, this isn't a long-term strategic plan with built-in absolute decision-making over the intermediate and long term. And repeating what I said earlier, that it is fully anticipated that we will come back and revisit this study. And as Mike said, there's that kind of real decision point around 2028 where the sitting board then will make really long-term commitments to a ZEV policy. And that's going to have the benefit of the evolution of technology, the democratization of different costs, the pilots and everything. But right now, what this study is meant to do is just form an informational base for very, very near term. So if you don't see a lot of hypothetical, well, it's going to improve in the next 3 years, it's just because we're just getting that very near term decision making, and it's going to be revisited and refreshed and rebooted every couple of years again to really take into account all of those changes that we assume will be made, but we don't know exactly what will happen, and we don't need to actually model that in order to have the current very, very targeted decisions made. Does that make sense?
Not to me, just to be totally honest, among friends.
No, I understand. Fair enough.
I just note that Kimley Horn in Charlottesville did model 1-to-1, in a place with longer routes and so on, that I don't think, anyway, it's
John, the only thing I would offer too is, you know, with this study, that a study is got a certain point in time. And so they started 2.5 years ago. They did their modeling with Woods, with their sub-consultant. And that's been, I think, a year plus ago when they finished that. But their data, we have their data. And so we can look at that data coming into our CIP, and we can model all the way down to 1-to-1, and we can go all the way up to 2-to-1. So I think that's one of the benefits of the study. It's provided those tools to us that our transit team can actually do that. So I just wanted to point that out.
That's great to know. Great to know that you have that ability.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If everyone doesn't mind just stretching out just a couple of more minutes, Stephanie's been patient and it's the last hand that I see up. So Stephanie, you want to give it a go?
Appreciate that, Jamitra. My question was very similar to John's, so that's good. It just seems to me that the 2-to-1 ratio doesn't really make sense based on the simulation results. Like even the worst case scenario in those results, it was like a 1.8 ratio. It feels like a more fair ratio is like a 1.36 based on that like 550K scenario, and even that's conservative because it's, you know, doesn't include on route charging. So it just seems like the choice of scenarios, like the ratios, just is a little weird compared to like what the simulation results found. So I would just encourage that revision to be made to the study before it's finalized.
Yeah, Stephanie, I think that we did eliminate 2-to-1 as not a scenario that we were going to use as informing any recommendations. Paul, again, correct me if I'm wrong. And we should probably have maybe a follow-up discussion about en route charging, because that's, you know, as you can imagine, very complicated, and there's some opportunity and a lot of, you know, challenges that we'd have to adjust to for that.
Yeah, the 2-to-1 ratio seems to still be in the draft, so maybe just drop that from the draft.
Well, I think Dimitra, we're at time. We appreciate everyone's questions. And to the extent we can answer them, at least partially, we appreciate it. Appreciate the conversation tonight. We are going to be continuing to work on this internally and with others and with the stakeholders as we develop our CIP, develop grant applications. But we appreciate the conversation tonight, and we will let you go for the evening. But thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.